You know, people like you are the reason I was afraid to go to school as a child.
And away we go. Part 2 of Mystique, actually a little bit of a mix between Rebecca Romaine, which because of Google I now know how to say, and I hope I'm not butchering it somehow still. Anyways, a mix between her and the comic book accurate Mystique. The beginning steps you may recognize as they were in my Hades look, but I'll briefly go over them now, and that is starting with making half of a skull out of polymer clay, wrapping it in a 2-part silicone mixture until it is cured. Taking it out and then using a spray foam in its place to make a bunch of lightweight little skulls. Obviously demolding them as we go. That is so lightweight. I think that might be perfect. Just have to put in less because that's a lot of waste. Oh. Ah! Oh God. Oh my God. Oh my God. And then once I had the approximate amount I thought I would need, I went on to altering them, which included but was not limited to cutting off the excess amount, which oddly sounded like someone biting into an apple. No! Oh, took one of the teeth out. Still doesn't look too bad. Am I the only one that hears that? No! What the f- Okay, so the issue at hand is the spray foam pre-cum, essentially. Not fucking Voldemort over here. Anyways, it seemed like I needed more, so I made some more and continued that process. I previously cut most of the excess off as stated, but I want to clear up the back end, which is a weird sentence to say out loud. I used a fairly sharp razor to kind of give it as flat of a back as possible, and then continued on using a coat of school glue to seal it all in, as foam is very porous, and I knew I wouldn't just be leaving it like this. Once all of them had it dried, I continued with the paint job, which was originally just going to be this original color, but I wanted to add dimension onto it, so I added a base layer of white. Came in with a chocolate brown on a disposable sponge that I had ripped up to dab it all on, really bring out that texture that was added onto each of these. Each of them is a little bit different despite using a mold. Finally, some only lightly watered down to very watered down black paint for the crevasses, as in the eyes and also the teeth area. All of these little nooks and crannies, being sure to wipe off where needed with a simple tissue. I did often go back and forth with all the colors that I had previously used, adding highlights back in and darkening select areas wherever need be. Once the paint job was done and completely dried to the touch, I wrapped some foam up in saran wrap to continue, placing each on top, and then got out my resin epoxy. Please, please, please make sure to do this in not only a well-ventilated area with a respirator for your lungs, but also with gloves on both hands, because sometimes things happen. Like when you reuse a plastic cup a few times for resin and it is no longer strong enough to support the product, and it breaks as you're mixing it, and said product gets on your hands.
Oh. 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 It went through. Oh my gosh.
If this happens, which it shouldn't because you're definitely wearing gloves, right? Immediately wash it off your hands. Using proper techniques, water does not work. Anyways, I digress. Using my gloved hand, I rubbed a thin layer on all of these, being sure that it was well covered. Originally, I was going to string these together with O-rings, and originally I had done a good job of that until I put it on and a bunch of them fell off, and I had a mini meltdown and realized I should be using something else. One, because it's stronger, and two, so I can manipulate it, because comic book Mystique actually has her skull belt formed into a not so natural shape, having a point at the bottom, and the sides of that said point go up further than a belt naturally would. Kind of like my Sabrina Carpenter, like the black and silver costume that I had done. So I simply pushed a wire through at the approximate same area on each, adding a fastener to one end and then giving myself about an inch of give on each end, and then cutting the wire and adding in the other half of the fastener onto it, and then twisting that half an inch or the inch wire to lock it into place. Then pulling the skulls across until they were equal, not measuring distance apart. Finally, it was time for the makeup. By this point, I had already bought and made the bodysuit, so I started painting my face with the color that would best match the bodysuit. Only after adding in my contacts, though, that was a nightmare. This wasn't a super opaque body paint, so I did need to add a few layers.
Well then.
and also set it every couple of layers with a color matched eyeshadow. I did my face and then pulled it down my neck. For my eye makeup, I'm using a black primer both on the lid and underneath, and blending that out with the heat of my finger, and adding a black eyeshadow over top of all that. All over the lid and cascading into a large wing, and then taking it underneath as well. Blending that out with a slightly different tone blue than I set my face with. Then adding a black liner to my top and bottom lash line, as well as a glittery eyeshadow that's both black and silver to my inner corner, and blending that out with my finger. Finally topping it off with a mascara. Actually keeping my brows as they are, but kind of shaping them a little bit better just in case they show through. And then adding the blue lipstick that's very close to the color I did to my face. Maybe about a shade darker and a little bit more towards purple. You may have seen my part 1 of this and wondered where this applique was going, and now you get to see where and how. I'm adding liquid latex onto the back of the entire piece, specifically to each dollop of the fabric paint. Waiting for that to dry down and then placing it on my forehead and holding it in place to make sure it stays. Then adding more of that body paint over top to make the tulle less visible. Also using those smaller pieces that I made around my nose area and then painting that lace applique as well. As well as painting the lace on my wig. Now this is one way to do it ahead of time, but I also wanted to see and show you the difference of doing it the day of versus days before, which is simply with liquid latex. I'm adding it on with a Q-tip, doing my best to mirror it, but I also did build up each one a few layers. Adding more onto the lace to keep it in place, ooh, like Busta Rhymes over here. As putting it on the edges, basically blending the two as much as possible to make it one cohesive piece rather than little pieces. Once those were mostly dry, at least to the top layer, I painted over them with that same body paint I had used on my face prior. And brought it down to my neck one more time, and then set it also one more time. Now, trypophobia warning, because this is what it looked like when I took it off. Oof. But that is it for today's video. I do hope you guys enjoy, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye guys, happy Halloween!